going to turn it over to Rebecca Ness. She is the Vice Chair of Bexley's Environmental Sustainability Advisory Committee. She's going to introduce Debra and tell you more about Love Your Alley, an initiative happening right now in our community that she spearheaded. So Rebecca, if you don't know her, is an acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist and owner of Monarch Acupuncture and Herbs on Main Street. She moved to Bexley from San Francisco in 2017. So thank you again, Rebecca, for all of your hard work coordinating Love Your Alley and for partnering with the library on this event. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. Welcome to Using Native Plants in Nooks and Crannies with Debra Knapke. I'm Rebecca Ness with Green Bexley. This is Love Your Alley's second event this year so far. The Bexley Public Library was kind enough to host Dr. Doug Tallamy on Sunday, and the recording is now available at the library's website. For those of you who haven't heard Dr. Tallamy talk, he's not to be missed. I've listened to him several times, and I always learn something new. Love Your Alley is about collaboration, sustainability, creativity, and beauty. It's transforming our underutilized alleys and yards into spaces filled with native plants, supporting both our pollinators and restoring biodiversity. This is our second year of Love Your Alley. Last year we planted 850 plants, and this year we're on track to plant 1,000 more. We have plans for all the attendees today. Next Wednesday, May 11th, the Drexel is showing Catherine Zimmerman's Hometown Habitat with Q&A afterwards with the producer and director. For 2 years, Catherine Zimmerman traveled around the country to visit hometown habitat heroes and film their inspiring stories of community commitment to conservation landscaping. Love Your Alley will also have a festival on Saturday, May 14th. This is the day to pick up free native plants, enjoy kids' activities, including a pet-a-bee, and learn about plants and beneficial insects from OSU, the Strange Lab, and OPHI, the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative. There will also be food from Wildflower Kitchen and music by Joey Hebdo. This year, Love Your Alley has formed partnerships with the Bexley Public Library and the Drexel Theater with events at both of these venues. Thank you so much to the Bexley Public Library for hosting this event tonight. For Love Your Alley, if you don't live in a house with an alley, there's still many ways to get involved. You can go native in your tree lawn or in your yard. You can help to plan and organize the event. You can grow seedlings and distribute them to neighbors, or you can join a plant installation team. We have plant installation teams happening on Saturdays and Sundays throughout the month of May with community service hours available. And there are also seasoned gardeners leading the plant installation teams, so there's plenty of opportunities to learn. You can visit bexley.org/loveyouralley to register, to volunteer, to enter for judging, enter your garden for the Art in the Alley Walk, peruse events, see a list of recommended native plants, speakers, and additional resources. And a big thank you to the Bexley Community Foundation for funding this initiative. Debra Knapke. Debra Knapke has loved plants as long as she can remember, from helping in her father's vegetable garden as a child to filling her college apartment with plants, and now gardening at her home on almost an acre of land. After 2 other careers, in 1992, Debra turned her avocation of plant study and gardening into her full-time career. Debra is passionate about gardening and the natural world and enjoys sharing knowledge through her books, magazine and newsletter articles, guest appearances on the radio program All Sides with Ann Fisher, and teaching horticultural and design classes for 24 years at Columbus State Community College. As part of her commitment to engage with and teach about the natural world, she was one of the founding members of the Stewards of Metro Parks, now Friends of Metro Parks, an organization that supports the mission and work of the Columbus and Franklin County Metropolitan Park District. Debra serves as the honorary president of the Herb Society of America for 2014 through 2016 and is active with Green Bridges, a committee that serves to conserve our native herbs and support gardens that create bridges for local flora and fauna to move and flourish in built environments. She also serves as the chair of the Sustainability Committee of GardenCom. Another passion is sustainable garden design and the history of gardening. In addition to her many private clients, Debra has been involved in public garden design in the Central Ohio area. She was on the design committee for the Sisters Garden at Inniswood's Metro Gardens, which is a children's garden that combines cultivated gardens with natural spaces. Currently, she's involved with the design of Flint Cemetery in Worthington, Ohio, and the partial redesign and maintenance of the Heritage Garden at the Ohio Governor's Residence. Debra Knapke.
Thank you, Rebecca. And there's a slight addition. I am now the interim garden manager for the Heritage Garden at the Ohio Governor's Residence. Mary Lewis retired after many years, and that was in September. And they said, well, gee, what are we going to do? And then come February, it was, we have to order annuals. We have to get all this together for the garden. And I said, I was asked to do it 3 times. The first 2 times I said no. But the third time I said yes. And you try saying no to Hope Taft. It's not easy. So tonight, the slides are just a touch washed out because of the cans. So I want you to imagine more vibrant colors as they come up. But what I'm talking about today is native plants in nooks and crannies, smaller, thinking about how plants fit under other plants. And after I get through my initial comments, it's going to be a plant marathon. So if you do not have the handout, there are handouts in the back. Yeah, bring a few more. There are probably some other folks, yeah. And I wrote them down. You're lucky. This time I put the common name first. Usually I put the botanical name first. And then I get people saying, wait, I don't do botanical names. Well, to me, botanical names come first. And then I have to stand there and think about what the common is. So there may be times when the botanical comes out and you are welcome to say, well, Deb, that's just a goldenrod. So nooks and crannies, as you look at this, so you all have probably seen places like this. And this is my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's house. Notice it's under the eaves. That's definitely a nook and cranny. That is an area that very often people try to stick things that need more water, and it's not going to get it. These are containers at the first location of Yoga on High or Yohai, and then it moved to another area, but that was one of our meditative garden areas. Plus, we were trying to figure out what could go into here in these spaces, which were very dry. This is a client. And these are those beautiful homes that are gorgeous, but there's hardly any space around them. Patio homes, executive homes, whatever. And this is where their utilities are. And they wanted something in here other than just mulch. And then finally, this is my cousin's place in German Village. They have since moved, and they wanted a garden. And those are they're like 12 to 15 inches wide. Do you know how hard it is? The smaller a space is, the harder it is to take care of it and figure out what to put in it. So first, I'd like to talk about what a native plant is, because there's a lot of discussion on that. And I'm going to start by saying it's relative. So first, a story. Does everyone know what the dawn redwood is? Big, beautiful tree with armpits, gorgeous. Well, the second time it came into this country was in the 1940s from China. Came into Arnold Arboretum at Harvard, and then it was disseminated from there to all over. I have a gorgeous one in my backyard. The first time it was here on this continent, though, was 11,000 years ago. It's in our fossil record. So when we talk about time, does that mean it's native to the western part of the United States? Well, not really. The climate has changed. What made it a good place for it 11,000 years ago, it changed. But people tried to hang time on it before the European colonists got here in the 1620s. Well, shoot, the Spanish were here in the end of 1400s, 1500s. And then the Vikings came into Newfoundland, brought weeds on their shoes or in their boats and whatever. And then that traveled. So at what point do we talk about time? So instead, I like to talk about place. Where something is native to. Is it native to a swamp? Is it native to this vernal pool? That kind of ecological system. And what are the communities of that ecological system? That for me is what defines native. And when something is from outside that ecology, then I consider it to be non-native, or in some cases for us, naturalized. A lot of people grow the little yarrow in their gardens. It's an herb. And there's discussion, is Achillea millefolium native to North America, or was it brought over at some point and it naturalized? Well, as far as I can tell, it is not native to North America. It came over in someone's pocket, on their shoes, on their boat, who knows what. But it is not native to an ecosystem here. However, it's a very useful herb. So just because something is not native does not mean we throw it out with the bathwater. Because if anyone touches my basil and says I cannot have it, there's going to be a problem. So, and I'm a food and herb grower. That to me is very important. And very few of what I grow, plants that I grow, are native to a good part of North America. And I am going to cheat at the very end, you'll see. So there's a term nativar or cultivar, and that's a plant that we have selected, we human beings, with our choice for what we want: taller, shorter, different color, disease resistant, different color of flower, different shape of leaf, etc. Well, nativar is a cultivar of a native. I'm not so sure I like that word, but it's being used a lot. So a cultivar. So I'm going to use one of my favorite herbs and native plants, purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea. And Echinacea purpurea, you can see on the bottom, I'll explain the 4 plants on the bottom in a moment, but at Mount Cuba at Delaware, in Delaware State, it's one of the 3 DuPont estates. If you're ever in Philadelphia, you need to go to Longwood, Winterthur, and Mount Cuba. The destination, find a good B&B and go to all 3. It will take you a full day to go through each one. So 3 days at least. And then you'll want to go back because you'll realize how much you've missed. So if you look at it, they did two ways of looking at a whole bunch of cultivars of Echinacea, although you can see there is a species in there as a control. Number of pollinator visits are these numbers. The top performers get a little leaf next to them. Would it surprise you to learn that the top performer and most visited is the white fragrant angel, not the species, which is that mauve pink, and that Echinacea purpurea came in second. Now only 2 fewer visits, but it is interesting that a cultivar beat out the native. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, is a cultivar as good as a native? I'm not so sure we can totally answer that question, but there are times when we can say, no, it's not. Next slide, I'll show you that. But in order of 1 through 4, Echinacea fragrant angel, the straight species. Notice there's a little sweat bee on that one. Here's a honey bee on Ruby Star, which is probably one of the most gorgeous in color of the Echinacea purpurea cultivars. And this right here, I've not grown it, but that is Amazing Dream. And it's actually a hybrid with angustifolia, Echinacea angustifolia plus Echinacea purpurea, etc., I believe. So then we figured out a way how to take that beautiful cone that's nice and sharp that deer don't like to eat, and we turned it into a powder puff. And some people like it. If you like powder puffs, go for it. I do want to point out here, this one right here, flowers beautiful and well-formed, lacked vigor, weak plants, floppy stems. Now, the reason it's not so much the floppy stems as those flower heads are really heavy. Once you start putting all those petaloid structures in there in place of something that was lighter, it rains on the ground. Not only that, I tried some of these because I thought, people are going to ask me about these. So I put them in my garden and they're really pretty. I had hot papaya. Do I have hot papaya here? Yes, I had this one and it's a gorgeous orange in your face color. And the deer ate it as soon as it bloomed because there's no spiky cone. So we have taken away its defenses. We have taken away a good part of its pollen and nectar, so it's no longer a wildlife useful plant, but it is cute. It's like a teddy bear. So you decide what you want in your garden and understand that if you have deer, these won't be there for very long. So non-native, that is not the question for me or the determination for me as much as invasive, non-invasive. If there's an invasive plant, it's gone out of my garden. I had a barberry that I was told would not flower and fruit. And I had it for years. And what happens with woody plants is they stay in a juvenile stage for a certain amount of time. And at some point they switch into mature. And once they switch into a mature point, their mature growth, they flower and fruit. So it was a little miniature. It was actually in a trough. It was cute. It had thorns, which is another problem with barberries. But it was cute and it was bright yellow, little beacon. And then it flowered, made fruit, gone. I cut it up. It went into the compost pile, not the berries, just the rest of it. And it's out of there. So I will test plants to check that out. And here in Ohio, we have a great organization called OIPC, Ohio Invasive Plant Council. They have a website and they show you how they gauge whether or not a plant is invasive or not. There's a whole protocol they put plants through. If you're curious about that, please go to the website and take a look. Plus they have not only invasive plants on there, but substitutes for invasive plants. Instead of Amur honeysuckle, plant this. Instead of calorie pear, plant that. And everyone knows what calorie pear is, right? The big white things that are all everywhere and are actually decreasing growth on Amur honeysuckle, which really makes me a little worried. Because if you think about it, anything that can take down Amur honeysuckle is going to need a nuclear bomb to get rid of. So, and this right here is one of our invasives we love to hate. And it's actually, Japanese beetles have found it. So it's getting some decrease in vigor. But this is purple loosestrife. So here it is at the Worthington Library. I took a picture of it at the Worthington Library, then went in and told them what they had. But it was such a great plant, picture. And this is Huntley Road, which intersects with 161. And these are the railroad tracks. And all that pinkish that you see there, that is this. Nobody planted it there. It got there some other way. And like calorie pear, it is self-sterile. So like will not pollinate like. So if you had some of the cultivars like Robert's Dream or Morden's Gleam, and you only had that one and everyone in your neighborhood had that one, it wouldn't spread, it wouldn't make seed. But somebody else brings one of the other cultivars in and it can cross because it's a plant that doesn't recognize self. It won't let it self-pollinate. Just like the calorie pear, we didn't have a problem when we only had Bradford cultivars, but when we got Aristocrat, Cleveland Select Chanticleer, all of a sudden they crossed, boom. So, and it's a fruit tree. Fruit trees often need to outcross. That's why when you order them from somewhere and they say, buy 2 different ones. So how well do you know where you live? This is Ohio, and these are the 5 physiographic regions: the Black Swamp, the Central Till Plains, the glaciated Allegheny Plateau, the Allegheny Plateau, and down here, the Bluegrass region, which comes up from Kentucky. And if you look at it, you can see that there are differences even in the middle there, where there are different ecosystems. There are, this down here, by the way, is the whole country. And you can look up by looking up ecoregions on the web. And this is level 3 ecoregion, this is level 4. And then level 5 goes into more detail. So these are our forests. And Whitney, is it possible to turn those cans off? Probably not. Okay, all right. Because you can't, it's hard to see the color difference, but you can go to the Ohio Biological Survey and go, it's called Natural Vegetation of Ohio, and look at this. But almost all of our, it's hard to see, but these are bolded, and the bottomland hardwood forests, actually they're not bolded, they're in italics. Those are the forests of Ohio. At one point, over 90% of Ohio was forested. So our soils are forest soils. There, and here you can see, just to remind you how our state is divided up. I grew up along the lake on the Portage Escarpment. We have really cool landforms. I came down here to school at Ohio State, and I had never been to Columbus before, and I looked around and thought, holy cow, it's flat here. Because I did not grow up that way. I grew up along Lake Erie's edge where there's cliffs and gorges and very different. But what grows where? And these are the questions. In these different forests, in the mixed oak forest, there are plants that grow with them. So this is really, unfortunately, really faded out because there's arcs that bring this together. So think about, there are many parameters in a garden. I picked 2, wet to dry, or continuums, if you will, and sun to shade. The 2 biggest mistakes we make when we plant is to plant something in the wrong light quality and the wrong drainage. So when we talk about plants and how they can adapt, we are looking at, do they belong in the sun? Do they belong in the shade? Do they like wet feet? Do they hate wet feet? And then there are plants that can take all of that, and we call those really vigorous. Because most plants have picked their niche or developed or evolved into their niche where they live the best. And then some of them, excuse me, like daylilies, can live just about anywhere. Pardon me for slurping. Okay. So what do you do when you have a yard? It's a new build. This was a client, and they had all these ideas for gardens because their old house, and they were friends also, their old house had all these incredible gardens, but they wanted to move further out into the country. Well, when you build a house nowadays, there's big machines that do everything, right? And compact the soil. And they had these plans, and they said, okay, we want to do this here. And I said, time out. First, we have to regenerate the soil because it's as hard as rock down there. Took my soil knife or perennial knife. Anyone have one of those? Best tool ever. And if you don't know what a soil knife or perennial knife is, look it up. A.M. Leonard makes a good one, and a whole bunch of other people do too. Not meant to be a commercial. It's just that when I'm in the garden, that's on my hip because I can do almost anything with it. So, and each of my kids had to have their own because they fought over them. So here, what you have to do is bust up that soil. And yes, you can till it, but I'm here to tell you, the less you till your soil, the faster it will heal. And the idea that when we do a vegetable garden that we till it each year, we're actually doing a disservice to the plants that we put in there. So plant clay busters, and you have this list on your sheet because that's a lot of words. And I'm not going to leave it up there for you to copy them all down. So clay busters to regenerate the soil, to heal the soil. There are cover crops like daikon radish, which you then pull and leave up on top. You know, if you're doing this over a year's time, cowpeas, annual sunflower. Man, do sunflowers break up the soil really, really well. And then weeds, you know, weeds are really cool. They have evolved to survive. That is their job. And they're very good at breaking up soil. And then we have perennials that once we get some initial work done, we put in perennials that break it up further. And then when the soil is more healthy, we then can bring in some that are a little bit more delicate. These are clay busters for the sun, including grasses. I just separated them out because a lot of people think of them as not perennials, but they are. And then ones for the shade that break up the soil. And that's a good place to start if you have damaged soil. And one of the things that happens in our alleys or our spaces that we call in between places is that they get degraded. Somebody changes the oil from the car and puts it over there, or garbage gets put over there, or that's where the garbage cans were stored. And you walked back and forth year after year. And while that doesn't seem significant, if you go on to Ohio State's campus and you can see where the students have cut through the different areas. And that soil, no grass is growing on that soil. Oh, by the way, just want to mention, there are lots of lists out there for native plants. There is a website called the Ohio Native Plant Month, and that is April, just passed. And there's a chart that Hope Taft and I created. Plus, there are a couple charts from Heather Holm. If you have not read any of her books on bees and wasps, it makes you respect them deeply. And her lists are incredible, plus pictures of the bees that go to the flowers. Our chart doesn't have any pictures. It's 8 pages of 10-point print. Get your magnifying glass out. A quick note about light in the garden. And like everything else, it's a continuum. And people often ask me, what is full sun? What is part shade? What is shade? Full sun, 6+ hours, or 8 if you're growing vegetables, fruits, and roses. 6 is on the edge. Part sun to shade is 4 to 6 hours, and shade is under 4. And there are different kinds of shade, dappled, light, situational. As you look at this house or block of wood, the east sun is gentle, beneficent. That's where your shade plants like to be, east sun. They will take a little bit of the hot sun at noon, but when the brutal sun, harsh sun of the west comes out, you don't want your hostas in 3 to 4 hours of west sun. They turn into crispy critters. So it's not only how long, but where. And your sun plants, well, you can say, well, it's 5 hours. Yeah, it's 5 hours of sun, but it's in the morning and it's kind of shady or dappled in between, and the plants are reaching. You've seen that before, right? And lilacs are really good at that as a shrub. They reach for the sun. The fun part of coming through Bexley, I like to come through Bexley because there's old shrubs and trees, and I can just tell when there's been a tree somewhere and it's gone, but the lilac is still over here blooming. Yeah. Okay, the plants. And like I said, this is a marathon. See all those plants on there? I have a slide for each one. So I will not be talking about particulars, but if there's something you really want to know, mark it down on there or raise your hand and say, and I will answer to the best of my ability. What I cannot do in the last half hour that I have is design your front garden. So don't ask that question. All right, starting with some small trees, small to medium trees. If you have a small area, small front yard, backyard, or you have that tree lawn, or you have the alley, think about the red buckeye, Aesculus pavia. And that's an actual tree. Warning, protect, protect. It is the favorite of deer. So if you have deer, you're going to have to protect it as it grows, and it likes to nibble on the new tips each year that it makes. Bottle brush buckeye, they don't seem to bother as much. And that's more of a shrubby buckeye, and they're tough. In 2008, remember when Ike, the hurricane, came through? I had a gorgeous one in my backyard. And our neighbor behind us had a double trunked wild cherry, and each double trunk was about this big. It came down on top of my bottle brush buckeye, totally flattening it. And I thought, okay, opportunity to put something else there. But I was wrong, because this plant is what we call a colonizing shrub. It sent out all kinds from the roots, and it came up, and it's 3 times as big as it was. So I guess it just needed a hurricane for me to learn that lesson. But it's a gorgeous plant. It does not make as many of the nuts, but it is incredible for pollinators. Look at all those flowers. Our serviceberry, shadblow, juneberry, so many different names. Fall, it is a 4-season plant. Fall color, absolutely fire engine, scarlet red. In the winter, it has a beautiful pattern of branches. In the spring, it has the sweetly scented white flowers that dangle, and then followed quickly by berries in June, and in summer, just a beautiful medium green color. So you can see the berries here. How many of you have eaten the fruit? What does it taste like? Candy. Anyone else? A cross between a cherry and a blueberry. Really good in pie and muffins, of which I make both. Now, what we're seeing, you want to make sure you don't stress this tree when you put it in. Make sure you water it well. It is now becoming susceptible to fire blight, but that happens when it is stressed. So if you're going to plant this tree, make sure, and that doesn't mean go out and fertilize it. It means make sure that in times of drought, and if it's a new planting, that you water it, and don't hope that Mother Nature waters it for you. And that giving it an annual top dressing of 2 to 3 inches of compost would be a good thing, or even better yet, leave the leaves. Don't take them away. We have something that's incredibly important in our gardens called nutrient cycling. The tree didn't put all that energy from the ground into leaves to have you rake them away. So as long as you're not smothering something underneath, leave the leaves unless you have something that's getting smothered or there's a disease problem. Always remove if there's a disease issue. River birch, Betula nigra heritage. And I put up the cultivar name because heritage has the most gorgeous exfoliating bark. Now, what does the common name river birch tell you? It doesn't want to go dry. So why do we insist on putting it between 2 things of asphalt where it's hot? And this is up on the cliff. So these trees, it's hard to see here, they were chlorotic. They were yellow because they were stressed. There often are names, either common names or botanical names, give us a hint to what the tree wants. This tree is most happy when it is growing along the riverside where it has evenly moist soils because of the hydric regime next to it. Redbud, incredible tree. They are a shorter lived tree 20 to 25 years, although I saw a specimen that was 50 years old, mostly hollowed out. It was absolutely gorgeous. So I didn't read the book. Who has eaten the flowers? Okay, what do they taste like? Okay. On a stew, cool. What did they taste like to you? A legume, okay. I've heard, well, I eat them on salad. Do it when they first open. If you wait like 2 or 3 days, they get kind of weird. But fresh peas. And if you pick the flower, that means you won't get the big pods everywhere with all of the seedlings that come up. But there are white red buds, which seems counterintuitive. There are also red buds that have purple foliage. There's a new one called Rising Sun that comes out gold and orange. I don't particularly like it against the color of the flowers, but then that's just me. You may love it. You know, color is personal, but this is the quintessential native, small native tree that grows on the edge of the woodlands with an associated group of plants in its ecology. And then our flowering dogwood, one of the most beautiful trees ever. They're in full bract now because these are the bracts and these little guys here are the flowers, little tiny. Yeah, these are modified leaves and they're the flowers and they're little tiny and they're yellow. And that is the fall color. And those are the flower buds for next year, which form in the summer. So if you want to prune this tree, you prune it after you see the bracts. Don't wait till fall, because then you're cutting off your flowers for next year. They form in the summer. This is one many of you may not know, the black gum, black tupelo, and this is sylvatica, sylvatica of the woods. Another edge of the woodland, fire engine color in the fall, absolutely gorgeous, beautifully scaffolded limbs. I have 2 of them in my garden. They grow very slowly. Eventually they can get really tall, but in my lifetime, they're not going to. And I planted them in the middle 90s and they're still, reasonably small. They slowly increase in diameter. It's just their nature. If you want something evergreen, consider our eastern white cedar. It's a lovely tree. There are some smaller ones. Now, you see this line? Deer browse. So this is at Cedar Bog in Urbana, which is a great place to visit. And this is out in one of the meadows there where these are growing. But this can give you some, if you don't have deer, or if you protect from the deer or spray, then you have an evergreen screen if you desire that. And then our Canadian hemlock, beautiful tree, easily pruned back to what I call a Y. So you pluck prune, you don't shear these unless you want a hedge. And you can make a hedge of this. But gorgeous tree, and there are some smaller ones, small cultivars, dwarfs that you can buy for a smaller place. Into shrubs. So I put some heights up here just to show you how we've selected plants. So here is black chokeberry, Aronia melanocarpa. Great plant for the birds. Great plant when it's in flower for all kinds of pollinating insects. It's great in the rain garden. It takes wet, it takes dry, but it doesn't get out of control, at least not yet. It is native. I had wine from it, quite tasty. And the jam was good too, although the jam was probably from the red chokeberry. You can see the flowers. It's in the rose family. So they look sort of like spirea, if you're familiar with that. So 3 to 6 by 3 to 6, tall and wide. You can get low scape mound, which is 1 to 2 feet tall, 2 feet wide. You can get low scape hedger, which is 2 to 3 feet wide, 3 to 5 feet tall, and you can get ground hug, which is 8 to 14 inches tall. But it goes 3 feet wide. So think of it as a ground cover. And when you cover the ground, that means you have less weeding. So think about that. Now we cover the ground with mulch, and that's okay. But it's better to cover the ground with something growing and green. And that when those leaves fall, they go back into the soil again and again and again. There are soils in our alleys, in our tree lawns, in those out of the way places. A lot of times our soils are dry. So 3 shrubs that will take dry soils once they are established, which means their first couple of years, please water them when our drought hits. Because if you don't, they're going to die and you'll say, well, that shrub wasn't good. That was operator error. And I've done a lot of that in my own garden, which is how I know. So there's the Carolina sweet shrub right here. It has flowers that smell sometimes like pineapple cotton candy. Other times they smell like sour milk. And I have not quite figured out why it's one or the other, whether it's weather conditions or what. Our native bush honeysuckle, the Dyervilla hybrids, there's Kodiak orange, Kodiak black, Kodiak red, Kodiak green, and variegated Kodiak with white and red or something like that. And then there are other series too. So when you're looking at some of these and you go to your favorite garden center and you see the bush honeysuckle and you see all these different kinds, just take a moment and look and read the label. We spend a lot of money on those tags to educate you. So take a look and it will explain to you how big this gets. And I'll talk about spacing at the end. I have something with that. And then 9 bark, Physocarpus opulifolius diabolo, which gets about this tall. Normally I say if your phone goes off, you owe $10 to the library or the Master Gardeners or whatever. There you go. I purposely turned, I turned off my own phone just before I came up here because at my last talk, my phone went off because someone forgot to mute it. Me. So many opportunities for operator error. Anyways, so Diabolo gets about this tall, and every 3 to 4 years, you give it what I call a renewal prune. You take it down to about here, and then it grows back up, etc. Otherwise, it gets a lot of dead in it. Yes.
I just had a question about like a mildew stuff that gets on the 9 barks.
Mm-hmm.
When you do that prune and take it all the way down, and
Mhm.
take all that stuff.
Take it away. Yeah.
away, then will that prevent?
So the question was, some of the 9 barks are prone to getting or susceptible to powdery mildew. And what you need to do is at the end of the season, take all that away. And this is where you do rake up the leaves around the plant and put them in the bad compost pile. If you have one of those. I have a good compost pile and a bad compost pile. The bad compost pile is probably the best weed seed place ever. But so you need to take that away. And if you prune it down and take all those the stems away, then you're reducing the inoculum. A lot of times it's weather conditions. Now I have not, knock on wood, I have never had powdery mildew on Diabolo. Yeah, and some of the others, I'm not sure. Someone told me there's one that's really susceptible to it, and I apologize, I cannot remember which cultivar that is. But I've not had it on this one. And this one's a small leaf one too, because it's dwarf all the way around. So what you might ask is if you're going to buy a 9 bark at a garden center, ask if they know the powdery mildew susceptibility, because we pay a lot of attention to that. We're trying to come out with new plants that are more disease resistant. And I will tell you, as we heat up in climate change, we are going to see more and more pest and disease problems. Oak leaf hydrangea for the shade, to part shade, wonderful plant. There is one called Bobo that's this tall. So you can have the big glorious ones that get 8 to 12 feet tall and wide, and you can have Bobo. So just take a look. Our winterberry hollies like a little bit more moisture in the soil. So if you have one of those low areas in your alley or your tree lawn or that in between space, take a look at these. Now you need a male, you need 1 male to 5 females if you want berries, because this particular plant is dioecious. The sexes are on different plants. So for red sprite, which gets about yay, you need Jim Dandy. Now Jim Dandy's taller, so put Jim Dandy off to the side, and then your red sprites here. And then there's Little Goblin and Little Goblin Guy. So don't you love the names? I don't know who sits there and figures all these out, but they are designed to make you want to buy them. Don't you just want Little Goblin and Little Goblin Guy now? Yeah. So these bright red berries are loved by birds. They usually last end of December, maybe middle of January before they're eaten up. Spice bush. Unfortunately, there are no small ones that I know of, but you can prune them and keep them smaller. This is a larger shrub, but you need 2 of them because they need to outcross. It's not so much male female as that they're self-infertile. And this is in my backyard. And they can get pretty big, and then the deer will chomp on them, which prunes them effectively for me. The berries are edible for animals and for us. They used to be used a lot in venison as part of venison stew. I find them pretty intense on the skunk continuum. At the end, you're chewing it, it tastes like a raisin, it's really good, and then it's like, ooh. So, but then someone else said, oh, I don't get that. So taste is personal, just like color is. And also it is one of the first shrubs to bloom in late March, early April, depending on Mother Nature. Into the perennials, nodding onion. This is one of our native onions. There's also ramps, which spread like the wind. So if you have ramps, you better have space. These also can spread via seed, and but they're so cute. Here they are in shade, and here they are in sun. Notice how much more dense they are in sun than they are in shade. So keep that in mind. This plant will take all the way from shade to sun. And this was a picture I took at Mount Cuba, by the way, in shade in their woodland area. But you're going to get a different effect on the plant. Oh, our beautiful native columbine, Aquilegia canadensis. You'll see a lot of Virginica and canadensis as part of the botanical name, because when explorers came over here, they just kind of called everything Canada east of the Mississippi. But if it was in the southern part of Canada, they called it Virginica because Virginia was one of the first states. So you'll see a lot of canadensis and Virginica, Virginiana, Virginicum, all that. And that's just telling you that you have a native plant. So notice this is a river, a stream. And here's the columbine. They like it a little bit more moist, even though we tend to grow them dry, and then wonder why they only last 1 season. They are a short-lived perennial anyways, 2 to 4 seasons, depending again on Mother Nature. So let them self-seed. When they come up with those really cool seed pods and the wind blows and they scatter, or you take some and scatter them where you want them, keep those generations going. Jack in the pulpit. For us, we knew that spring was here up in Lake County when we could see the Jack in the pulpits in the woods. I lived next to a creek. It was great. And I spent a lot of time in the woods, and Jack in the pulpit just told me, okay, it's spring. And it is. The butterfly weeds for the sun. If you like orange and you have dry soils, it's Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly weed. If you like pink to white and you have wet soils or moist soils, look at swamp milkweed. There's a reason why swamp is part of its name. It's fantastic for the rain garden too, because it will also accept dryness, periods of dryness, but it prefers to have a little bit more wet. So both are good for monarchs and so many other insects and butterflies, lots of butterflies. One of our greatest ground covers is Asarum canadense, our wild ginger. And yes, you can use the rhizomes as a ginger substitute. It is, its European cousin is evergreen. This one goes down, but it has the wildest little tiny flower at ground level, which is pollinated by carrion beetles. So don't stick your nose into it because it's not very pleasant. The asters for sun. The wild ginger, by the way, is shade. This is sun. We have our New England aster, purple dome, which is a cultivar. And we have the smooth aster, and there's a great one called bluebird. So look for that if you like asters. For the shade again, although when these bloom, they are, most of the trees don't have their leaves, so effectively they're in the sun. But these are the spring beauties, and they're probably in somebody's lawn here. Wonderful, and those tubers are edible. They taste like the best potato, but they're only this big around. So you have to eat a lot of them, which means eating a lot of your spring beauties, which, but if you're really hungry and stuck in the wilderness, you can eat the tubers of this plant. They're better steamed than raw. For sun, tick seed, coreopsis. There are so many coreopsis out there. This is the large flowered coreopsis. Here is a bumble on the flower of one of them. And these are short-lived perennials. So if you give them compost in the spring, they last longer and flower better because they essentially bloom themselves to death. They start blooming in June and keep blooming and blooming and blooming into September. And when they do that, they're not making as much of a root system. And so then they don't always make it through the winter. The threadleaf coreopsis, very fine leaves. This is moonbeam, which is a pale yellow. Route 66 does well in my garden. Some of the millions of new cultivars that have come out don't seem to last, but these two do. The Uptick series, cream and red, and they're just beautiful, and they're pollinator magnets. So these are cultivars. These are not the straight species. And if you're a purist in species, you're going to say, nope, sorry, not going to do it. But they also stay more compact and whatever. So you have to decide what you want in your garden. For the shade, this is the fringed bleeding heart, and this is the Dutchman's breeches. So if you use your imagination, those are upside down pants. Dutchman's breeches, the centrocularia. And that's just a little tiny one, but they eventually make nice big colonies, but they're only this tall. But you can't put that in there if you have awful soil. You need to bust up the soil first with your clay busters and then put this one in after. Because they like good woodland soil with lots of duff. That's leaves and branches and other plant parts over time that have broken down. Our little dwarf larkspur. This was in Kamama Prairie down in Highland County, and this is at the governor's residence in the Heritage Garden. It's about this tall. Think of a delphinium this tall. I know everyone likes those big, beautiful delphiniums up here. Get over it. We don't grow them well here in Ohio, but this is our native, and it's here in the shade in good loamy soil, good woodland soil. Purple coneflower, I talked about already, but take a look at the black swallowtail there and one of the iridescent sweat bees. Just what more can I say about a plant that just keeps giving and giving? And here's the question. People will ask me, well, is that a perennial or an herb? And my answer is yes. It all depends on how you're using it. the little iris cristata, the crested iris for the shade, and put it on the edge of your bed because it's only this tall. And if you blink, you will miss the flowers. They don't last very long, but who cares? Because when they come out, they're absolutely gorgeous. So this is in my garden. And this from Stonehouse Nursery, a little bluer, but this is just the straight species that I got from a friend in a plant swap and has slowly grown into a colony. In the sun, Liatris, and there's some Liatris on the table. It's called Blazing Star or Gay Feathers. I like Blazing Star better myself. So this is Liatris spicata, the spike blazing star, and this is the rough blazing star. This was in my front garden last year, and it sat there and posed for me. After I was wondering, is it still alive? And it was, but it was sunning itself. It was perfectly sunning itself next to a false sunflower. And so then that's when you get the picture of the year. Virginia bluebells, Mertensia virginica. This is a true spring ephemeral. And what that means is it comes up, it blooms, sets seeds, gets hot, and underground it goes. It's done. It goes summer dormant. We always talk about winter dormancy, but this is summer dormancy. Doesn't like the heat. So this is a hillside in a friend's garden, and they spread. But then after they're done, you know, you can put other things in there too that come up later so that you don't have a blank slate. No matter what you call it, bee balm, monarda, oswego tea, it was a tea substitute. It's a medicinal plant. It smells good. It attracts the eastern swallowtail, the hummingbird moth, and this is a red spotted purple. That's just some of the butterflies that come to it. Birds will feed on the seeds. It is rhizomatous, which means it likes to move a little bit. So if you have a small space, this might be the only plant you have in it. But it also has short ones. It's called the Grand Marshal and the Grand Parade series that only get this tall. I will warn you, though, they are a lot less vigorous than their taller counterpart here. Pachysandra procumbens. So many people grow in shade the Japanese Pachysandra. This is the Allegheny spurge, and I'm cheating here. It's native to Western Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Southern Indiana, Tennessee, Virginia, and it didn't come into Ohio. At least we haven't found it. So I'm calling it east of the Mississippi native instead of an Ohio native, because it definitely is a woodland plant, and we have the types of woodlands that it likes to grow in. And I really like this plant, so I'm making it an honorary native of Ohio. It is great as a ground cover. It has these wonderful flowers that are very good for early spring pollinators. And then it covers the ground and weeds don't come up through much of this. I just wanted to point out, this is the smooth penstemon. And it is white, sometimes with a blush of pink or purple and green, but we have these red leaf cultivars, Husker's Red and Dark Towers. I will tell you that the Chalcedony midget moth and Baltimore butterfly larva are obligate eaters of these plants. They do not grow on anything else. So you will get the larva of those butterflies and then the butterflies in your garden if you grow this plant. Now, if you grow the red leaf cultivars, that's not as good for the caterpillars. So if you want these caterpillars, grow the straight species. This is where straight species versus cultivar makes a big difference for butterfly larvae. But if you like this better, okay, put that in where it shows and then put some of this out in the corner where, you know, it just grows. It will self-seed. And also for its flowers, all of these bees, the minor bee, mason, large leaf cutting, halictid bees, butterflies, sphinx moths, etc., all pollinate this plant. and get nectar and pollen from it. So incredibly useful plant. It's going to be blooming here in about 2-3 weeks. Phlox covers the ground. We have the tall summer phlox. That's not this one. This is a different species. This is the one that's in bloom now, that when you go to the garden center, you can't buy because everyone else has bought it before you. Because you see it in bloom and it's gone. But it's evergreen. In the winter, it looks like this. Instead of having bare ground, you have a ground cover. And you're not looking at bare soil. You're not having wind and water erosion, etc. These are the shade phlox. So Phlox stolonifera, creeping phlox, and this is called creeping phlox or woodland phlox, Phlox divaricata, in the woodland. Shooting star, it's one of the primulas, upside down flower. It's really fun to watch the bumbles on this one. Mine are in full bloom. In fact, I took that picture yesterday in my garden. Rudbeckia species. So we have Rudbeckia fulgida goldsturm, which sometimes has a fungal issue. And there are other Rudbeckias. This is the sweet black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia subtomentosa, which I love, and so do a lot of pollinators. And this is a cultivar, American Gold Rush. What a performer, amazing performer, and also is visited by a lot of pollinators. Solidago, goldenrods, not the reason you are sneezing. That is ragweed, ragweed. The pollen is sticky and heavy and has to be moved around by a bee. Ragweed is wind pollinated, and that's what goes into your nasal passages and makes you miserable. So a lovely little one that will take, that likes part shade, but will take shade, but kind of flops a bit, is the blue stem. And it has flowers in the axils, and then Solidago rugosa and fireworks. Beautiful. It looks like there's fireworks on top of the plant. We also have Ohio goldenrod and Riddell's goldenrod for wet spaces, but they get kind of tall. Our little, and I think you have some of this, the sedum ternatum, our little woodland spurge. This is a sedum that is native to Ohio. And it will go in the sun, but it gets really kind of stressed. It prefers that part sun to shade, and it prefers drier locations, but it will take wet locations. And this, again, you can see I have it planted next to thyme in my garden. Just a couple quick grasses. This is prairie dropseed. The short one is called Terra. In the autumn, it is pumpkin orange. And then little blue stem. There are some short ones now that are this tall. And these bunch grasses are important for places for insects and pollinators to overwinter. Another thing we don't think about, it's not only about the food, but it's about shelter. And here I'm cheating. This is actually native to Mexico, but it is a superb pollinator. So we're just going to say a North American native. But this is a zinnia, and you can see that the butterfly loves it. And of course, nasturtiums are not native, but violas, some of them are, not this one. But again, like I said, I'm cheating. And they're great for window boxes and those other tight places. So on your sheet, you do have this design. It's kind of bled out a bit, but people ask me how to space. Each one of those squares is a ½ an inch. So a ½ an inch equals a foot. So think of that. So each of those squares is a foot, and those plants, some of them I talked about tonight, you can see how I space them. And if a plant says it gets 18 inches wide, when you put 2 of them down, you put center to center 18 inches, and then they grow together. That's how you space your plants, not 2 feet. And this was a challenge I did for myself. I don't have time to go through it, but could I use only 5 different plants in a design and get seasonal coverage and winter coverage for nesting? And the answer is yes. So gardens are not made, by singing, "Oh, how beautiful," and sitting in the shade. These are all containers. None of these are in the ground. This is someone's backyard, garage, and driveway. So you can, now most of them are annuals and they're not native, but I just thought it was fun to show you what you can do with plants. Thank you very much for staying over 5 minutes.
If you're open to some questions, we have a few.
Absolutely.
Of course, from in person, but I just wanted to read a few that were online. Let's see here. Well, someone asks, will Deb tell us where to buy native perennials?
Oh, good question. Okay, on that same website, Ohio Native Plant Month, there is a chart, a list of places to go buy native plants. Right around here, a lot of our garden centers are now stocking native plants, and of course, cultivars of native plants. One of my favorite places to go is Scioto Gardens up in Delaware. I also enjoy visiting Gail Martin and Natives in Harmony up in Marengo. I like going to Baker's Acres out in Alexandria. Please go 25 miles an hour in the center of the little town, because if you don't, you will get a ticket. And then I also like to go up and visit Groovy Plants Ranch. Jared is getting more and more natives in, because I said, Jared, we need more natives. So those are places, and of course, there's Oakland Nursery, there's Traders. We are lucky in this area. We have some amazing garden centers. And then of course, all of our plant sales. There are a lot of the wild ones have their plant sale. They may have already had it. Thank you. Thank you. The wild ones have a plant sale. Native plants, many of them are rescued and also shared from yards and whatever. It's a combination. So, and then go on again to that website. There's a list of native plant purveyors, plants and seed in Ohio.
We have questions about clay busters.
Yeah.
Are there any shrubs that are clay busters, and how long does it take to improve the soil with them?
Yeah.
Just clay busters in general.
Okay, so with clay busters, in terms of shrubs, there are some shrubs that will deal with clay better than others. The ones that tolerated the dryness, the calycanthus, the 9-bark, and the, of course, I'm blanking on the third one, but they will tolerate it more. The thing you need to do is break up that soil and add compost whenever you put in, when you know you have damaged soil, when you are putting in shrubs and trees. But don't add too much compost, because then the roots of that shrub or tree will want to stay in that good stuff and not put their roots out into the soil. So you need to break it up and distribute that, not just put big handfuls of compost around the outside and say, oh, I'm doing a good thing. You're not, because then it will just stay there. Yes, 10 different people will tell you 10 different ways to plant a shrub or a tree. Do you leave the wire cage on or take it off of a B&B? Do you rip apart all the roots? There are reasons for doing a lot of different things. If I take something out of a container and it is totally root bound, if I don't break those roots apart, that tree, shrub, plant is going to fail. That's when it's, you went to the sale and you got all the sale plants at the end of the year and everything's really tight in the pot. You have to cut it off. You do have to score it and you have to spread some of it out. If what you have is good solid roots that aren't overdone, then I will rough it up definitely and make sure any circling roots on the bottom are pulled out, but I don't take everything off. With some trees with B&B, when they dig them and put them into that, sometimes you have to be really careful that the ball doesn't break, because if the ball breaks on some trees, then the tree will fail. It doesn't have it goes into transplant shock. That's not true for every tree. And so there's, not to make it sound complicated, but when you look at a plant, look at the integrity of the root ball and think about whether or not you need to do surgery or whether you can put it in the ground as it is. The least disturbance you do, the better for the plant, But if it means that the plant will fail because it's so choking itself, especially trees and shrubs, when that happens, you'll get what we call encircling and girdling roots. And if you go outside and look at trees and you see a tree that has a flare on one side and is flat like this, I will guarantee you take away the mulch or whatever that's down there, go down a couple inches, you will find a girdling root, which is stopping the tree from expanding. And eventually that tree will fail. So I hope that answers that. That's a downer question. Yes. So the question is, how do you layer? How do you layer your seasons? How do you layer your spring ephemerals and your trees and your shrubs and your perennials and your annuals? I have 37 years to tell you that just when you think you get it right, something happens and it changes. The tree disappears or grows or whatever. But, you know, joking aside, it's basically understanding what's going to happen when. So you plant daffodils and it's in an area that the tree is not leafed out yet. So the daffodils come up, it's great. And then maybe you put hostas in. So they come up. You don't have to cut off the daffodil foliage. You just kind of tuck it underneath the hostas that are coming up. And that's one way of layering in the shade because hostas don't go in the sun. When you're talking about, say, a prairie plants, you figure out when they bloom, like my five species gardens. I have a spring, I have 2 summer, I have a fall, and I must have another spring. I have to go back to that. But, and the way that they come up and cover the ground or whatever is how they'll intermingle. And over time, they will self-seed, they will move. Some of them like, let's see, Monarda right here. That one's going to spread out underneath. So it's going to come out and other things are going to grow in it. So a lot of times nature makes those choices for you too. But what you try to do is look at the season and the height. So you're looking not only at how big it gets, but how big it grows and how it moves. So I say that plants have 4 dimensions. They have height, they have width, they have depth, and they have time. So you have to see into the future, and that just takes trial and error. But that is the crux of design work, is how is it going to look in 2 to 5 years? And Pete Udolph, who's just an amazing designer, he'll design these incredible gardens, and they're all over. There's the Laurie Garden in Chicago and a new one at the Delaware State University. And he said in one of them that he did for England, he said, "We have now planted it. Now we wait a year and see what we have done wrong." And that is true because we're dealing with a living thing. So many people want plants to be furniture. They want a plant that's going to grow 2 feet tall and 2 feet wide and stay there in perpetuity. And it doesn't quite work that way a lot of the times. Although we're working on it, we are selecting plants that grow 8 to 14 inches tall, cute little groundhog black chokeberry. So I'm be curious to see if it actually stays that short. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.